We are on DAF Kufhei Amid Aleph. It'll be a short DAF today. And we were talking about Havdalah yesterday, and but now we're going to go back to Kiddush. Rav Chananya Bar Shalmi of Talmidei de Rav Havu Yasvi B'Su'udasa V'Koy Alayhu Rav Hamnuna Saba. These sages were sitting at a meal on Friday afternoon, and Rav Hamnuna Saba was their attendant. Amrulei Zil Chazi Imakdish Yoma. They told him, go and look outside and see if it's become dark and Shabbos has arrived, and if so, nafsik v'nikve l'shabta. Then we would be required to finish our meal, stop eating, meal over. According to what they were thinking, they felt that the meal had to end, and you'd have to bring out an entirely new table setting and a totally new meal for the Shabbos meal. That was what their feeling was. And therefore, Amr Lahu Lo Tzrichisu. So the Rav Hamnuna Saba said to them, that would not be necessary, because Shabta Kava Nafsha, because Shabbos establishes itself, meaning that it's not necessary for the human being to acknowledge the entry of Shabbos by placing a new meal on the table. You're allowed to continue the meal that you started before Shabbos, and as long as, like Shmuel had said previously, Pores Mapa Umakadesh, you just place a cloth over the food, make Kiddush, and then commence what you started, that is sufficient, because the power of Shabbos is automatic. It doesn't require human demarcation in order for Shabbos to be here. All you need to do is to make Kiddush so that you acknowledge it's Shabbos, but you're not required to start a new meal. So the Amar Rav Kishem Shah Shabbos Kova'as L'Ma'aser Kach Shabbos Kova'as L'Kiddush. And as the Master had taught, just like Shabbos changes the reality for Ma'aser, so too Shabbos automatically changes the reality for Kiddush, meaning that you're not allowed to continue eating until you make Kiddush, but once you've made Kiddush, you're allowed to commence your eating that you started from before Shabbos. Now, what does it mean Shabbos changes the reality for Maaser? So there's a halacha as follows. If I have grain that has not yet been brought in from the field, the halacha is that achilas Aryai is mutter, that a happenstance, non-fixed eating, like a little nibble on some of the grain that's outside, hasn't been brought into the barn yet, is permitted even before I tithe it. It's only achilas keva that is aser, that is going to be forbidden. And the Gemara has said that on Shabbos, even achilas arai, even a happenstance eating, is not permitted. Because of the importance of Shabbos, anything that I do is weighted, has gravity. So therefore, even a snack is considered to be significant eating because of the holiness of Shabbos. And therefore, even if it's just a snack, I can't eat it because it's Shabbos. And so therefore, Shabbos creates a reality of gravity. The gravity of the holiness is created for Meiser. And the same thing, once Shabbos arrives, I'm not allowed to commence eating until I make Kiddush, but at the same time, my acknowledgement of Shabbos is not a factor. It's that Shabbos is there automatically by itself, and it changes the reality on its own. So Savar Mina Ki Hechi de Kava L'Kiddush Kach Kava L'Havdalah. So the initial thinking was, based on this story, that just like Shabbos is weighty on its own, such that once Shabbos arrives, I have to stop eating and I can't eat anything until I make Kiddush, so too, once Shabbos departs, once it's Saturday evening, and once that evening arrives, I'm not allowed to eat anything until I make Havdalah. So Amar Lahu Rav Amram Hachi Amar Rav L'Kiddush Kova'as V'lo L'Havdalah Kova'as. And he said to them, no, it's only as far as the entry of Shabbos where you have to drop everything, make Kiddush, in order to be able to commence eating. But when it comes to Havdalah, that's not the case. And the reason is because if you started Shalosh Shudas, you show more kavod to the Shabbos by continuing and prolonging the Shabbos meal even after Shabbos is over. And therefore, you're not obligated to make Havdalah right away. You can continue eating as long as you like.
What about bringing Shabbos in early?
What about bringing Shabbos in early?
Which we do.
You're allowed to. You're allowed to. But here we're talking about when you didn't bring Shabbos in early. Shabbos is automatic. If you want to declare Shabbos upon yourself, you can bring the holiness of Shabbos upon you earlier. But if you don't, then Shabbos is like a steamroller. It's going to come over you, regardless of whether you like it or not.
Didn't we learn a couple of blood ago that you're not supposed to start a meal within 3 hours of Shabbos starting Friday night? So how are they eating this?
What right did they have? That's a good question. Maybe they started already well before. Yeah, it was a short day in the winter, and they started a long time before. But then the Gemara qualifies this rule about Shalosh Shudas. If you started Shalosh Shudas before evening, you're allowed to commence, and you don't have to make Havdalah right away upon the exit of Shabbos. However, once the Shabbos is over, you're not allowed to begin a meal until you make Havdalah. And as I mentioned yesterday, this is a common mistake that people make. I see this probably every week. I see this at Shalosh Shudas, where people come down for Shalosh Shudas and they don't wash. And I will get to this in just a second. And the requirement to stop eating, which we said you're not required to stop eating if you started Shalosh Shudas, is only when you started a Seudah, which is by definition with lechem, with bread. But if you're just drinking a beverage or you're having a little snack, then you have to stop eating upon the exit of Shabbos. Now, for our halachic purposes, the exit of Shabbos, at least misafek, is the Bein Hashmashos period, is the twilight period. So immediately upon the onset of Shkia, you have to be machmir, and you're not allowed to start a new meal. So that's why we try to always finish mincha a couple minutes before Shkia. And we tell people to go wash right away before Shkia, so that at least you're starting your Shalosh Shudas before Shkia, then you can commence as long as you like. But people who go downstairs to Shalosh Shudas and don't wash, and then drink a beverage or have a little nibble of like Peter loves the tuna at Shalosh Shudas. So, and so if you just eat the tuna but without washing, and so forth, so then it's a problem. Halachically, it's a problem, right? Because you're starting to eat something that's not a seudah after choshech, after it's dark, and that's usher.
Even if you made the bracha already.
Even if you made the bracha already, that's right. That's right.
Your next so when is that point? Do we?
It's a shkia. It's at sunset.
We know that though when we're sitting at the Shalosh Shudas.
It's almost as soon as you walk in.
Well, you don't, and that's why you can't drink or eat anything unless you wash.
So we should start mincha earlier, so we aren't causing this problem.
We usually. Well, it's not lifneiver. It's not lifneiver.
We have a few minutes leeway.
We put challahs on the table. Ki yesharim darchei Hashem. God's ways are upright. Person wants to, if having sidurim in shul is also lifneiver because someone may put it on the floor. You can go. How far are you going to go with lifneiver?
Really, the trouble is if you don't wash, you better stop eating almost immediately when you get into Shalosh Shudas. You can't keep going.
I wouldn't even start. I don't think it's.
I think around 10 minutes. I think something like that.
Usually, no. I mean, b'shas hadechak. If you plan on having Shalosh Shudas,
after Shkia.
We finish mincha right before Shkia. We tell people should go downstairs almost immediately to wash. If you miss it by a couple of minutes, I would. But 10 minutes is already too much.
Really?
Yeah.
Mizonos doesn't count.
Mizonos does not count. Yeah. So the crackers are no good. Are not good enough. Okay. And furthermore, the Gemara says that which we require you to stop drinking or not begin drinking after dark is only when it comes to a significant beverage like wine or beer. But water is not a problem. Now, I don't believe we paskin this way. I have to go back and double check the halacha, but you'll see a dissenting opinion. Upliga de Rav Huna. This argues with Rav Huna de Rav Huna chazia lehahu gavra de shasamaya kodem havdalah. Rav Huna once took note of a man who was drinking water, had started drinking water after Shabbos but before Havdalah. Amar leilo mistafi mar me askara. Aren't you scared of getting the askara disease, which say some kind of throat asphyxiation, or an inflammation of the throat, which causes a person, can sometimes be fatal. The Tana Mishmei de Rebbe Akiva, sometimes they translate it as the croup, but I don't know if it's diphtheria. Yeah.
That's with diphtheria.
Yeah. The Tana Mishmei de Rebbe Akiva kol hatoim klum kodem sheyavdol misaso ba'askara. That if a person tastes anything, and according to this mandorm, it's even water before Havdalah after Shabbos is over, that person will die through askara, through asphyxiation. It's mida kineged mida, because you put something down your throat, God will constrict your throat, and that will be the cause of death.
Is there an argument about water between, like at the entry of Shabbos before Kiddush?
There is such a discussion as well. The Mekubalim, it's brought down in Shulchan Aruch, say that you should not drink water either during the twilight period on Friday afternoon and during the twilight period as Shabbos is leaving, because those are the times when the Neshamas both come out of Gehenna and go back into Gehenna, and they drink the water from the river in order to cool off or to stock up before they go back into Gehenna. It's a different discussion. Okay, Rabbanan Devei Ravashi.
So if you hear the public Havdalah that we make in shul, is that enough for someone to then have something?
If you want to be Yotzei with that Havdalah, yeah, sure. You're Yotzei with that Havdalah.
In Shemona Esrei?
No. You have to hear. You have to make Havdalah Lakos. Let's go on. We're going to see all of these things. Rabbanan Devei Ravashi lo kapti amaya. The rabbis of the Beis Medrash of Ravashi were not careful with water. They took liberties of drinking water before Havdalah. Okay, so you have a machlokus here about water. Ba'amine Ravina me Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Misha lo kidesh be'erev Shabbos mahu sheyakadesh v'alach kol hayom kulo. Now we have another question. What if you neglected to make Kiddush Friday night? It's one of those really late Shabboses. In the summer, you get home late from work and you collapse in your sofa. It never happened to you, Bob, right? And then you forget, you fall asleep, and you wake up. By the time you wake up, it's the morning, and you haven't made Kiddush.
Doesn't happen.
Has it ever happened to anyone?
I go to the bathroom a few times. I never sleep straight.
All right, TMI. Okay, so Amrle, Mida Amri, B'nai. So the question is, what are you supposed to do? So can you make Kiddush during Shabbos day? So the Gemara says, Amrle Mida Amri B'nai Rabbi Chia Mishalo Hivdil B'Motzai Shabbos Mavdil V'Holech Kol HaShabbos Kulo Hachanami Mishalo Kidesh Be'erev Shabbos Mekadesh V'Holech Kol HaYom Kulo. So he said, look, let's apply a logical application. We know that there's a halacha that if you neglect to make Havdalah Saturday night, you fall asleep without making Havdalah, so then you have the rest of the week, or at least a portion of the rest of the week, until Wednesday to make Havdalah. So the same logic should argue that if you missed Friday night, you have the rest of Shabbos to make it up and to make Kiddush during the day. So so let's challenge that. Leilei Shabbos v'leilei Yom Tov, yesh bahen Kiddusha al hakos, v'yesh bahen hazkar b'birkas hamazon. But Shabbos v'Yom Tov, ein bahem Kiddusha al hakos, v'yesh bahen hazkara b'birkas hamazon. The Brisa seems to contradict, because the Brisa says the night of Shabbos and the night of Yom Tov have two features. They both feature Kiddush, and they feature saying Ritzei and Yalav V'Yavo and Birkas Hamazon. But on Shabbos day and on Yom Tov day, you only have the Yalav V'Yavo and Birkas Hamazon, but you don't have Kiddush during the day. So you see that you can't make Kiddush during the day. V'isal kadaitach mishel kidesh be'erev Shabbos mekadesh v'al kol hayom kulo Shabbos v'yom tov nami mishkachas lu diyesh behen kedusha al hakosti lo kidesh meurta mekadesh l'machar. And if you're going to argue that if you missed out Kiddush Friday night, you can make Kiddush the following day, so then one of the features of Shabbos day should also be making Kiddush al hakos in a situation where you neglected to do so Friday night. So the Gemara answers, no, you can't bring a raya from there, because Amar lei di'i lo ketani. The Brisa is not talking about a b'di'evet situation where you didn't make Kiddush Friday night. Really, in reality, the halacha should be that if you missed out Friday night, you should make Kiddush during the day. But that Brisa is talking about normative situations, which are lichatchila. Lichatchila, you only make Kiddush Friday night. You don't make Kiddush the following day once you make Kiddush Friday night. So Esvei, let's now bring another challenge. Kavod Yom v'kavod Laila, kavod Yom Kodem. Now, here's a very interesting halacha. That if you want the honor that you have to show to Shabbos and Yom Tov, the nighttime is not as important as the daytime. And this could be for a number of different reasons. But
I want to give your kids a cookie.
Right.
You should wait during the day.
Right. Yeah. Nebuch on a guy who only has one cookie, but in any event,
like a nice Danish or something.
Right. But if you have something special and you want to save it for Shabbos, and you can either choose it for the Friday night meal or the Shabbos day meal, you should save it for the Shabbos day meal, right? Mendel's absolutely correct. So, Yeah, right. V'im ein lo ela kos echad, omer alav kiddush hayom, v'pnei shekiddush hayom kaidem lekavod yom. So, but the qualification of the brisa is, but if you only have one cup of wine, you would think that since wine represents kavod Shabbos, you should save it for Shabbos day. But no, since you have to make kiddush Friday night, so the kiddush that you need to make Friday night trumps the greater aspect of kavod that exists during the day, and you should use the cup Friday night. So the Gemara's question is, V'misa lishavke ad lamachar v'liavid beitarti. But says the Gemara, if there is an opportunity to make kiddush Shabbos day, because if you miss it Friday night, you can always make it up Shabbos day. So then let's kill two birds with one stone. You can accomplish both. You can accomplish the greater kavod of the yom and kiddush during the daytime. That would be the better solution, no? So this proves that you can't make kiddush during the day. So Amar lei chaviva mitzvah b'shaita. He said to him, no. Even though there is an aspect of kiddush during the day, but it's more important to make kiddush Friday night whenever you have the opportunity, so much so that even trumps the aspect of greater kavod during the day. And by the way, Rashbam explains that we learn this out from the law of karbanos, because the Torah says that Olas Shabbos b'Shabbato, you have to bring the carbon ola, the carbon tumid of the ola, on a daily basis, including the ola of Shabbos on Shabbos. And that teaches us that even the emurim, even the innards have to be burnt on the Mizbeach on Shabbos itself, even though you could theoretically start only burning them on Motzoi Shabbos, because you're allowed to burn the emurim of the carbon all night. But nevertheless, we tell you, violate Shabbos and burn the emurim on the Mizbeach while it's still Shabbos, because chaviva mitzvah b'shaita. What the Torah wants you to do the mitzvah at the first available moment, even if it means foregoing other considerations.
I mean, this argument about kiddush, they're not talking about kiddush to Rabbanan at all. They don't have this discussion.
Well, when you say kiddush, I think you're talking about kiddusha rabbah.
Yes.
Kiddusha rabbah, by the way, is a euphemism. It means the great kiddush, but it's a euphemistic for really a tiny kiddush, because really the kiddush that we make Shabbos day is not a kiddush at all. It's basically you say a pasuk or a few psukim, and then you say bori pri agafen. So there's no bracha there. There's no separate bracha for kiddush. So we call it Kiddusha Rabbas to sort of like a Lashon Sagi Nohor, like a language of saying that a blind person is extremely sighted, right? Similarly, we call this the Great Kiddush when it's really a very tiny semblance of Kiddush. So that's why the Gemara doesn't reckon with that as a Kiddush. Here we're talking about, you say, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'rad savanu, etc., etc., etc. So now the Gemara says, first of all, let's challenge the premise that chaviva mitzvah b'shaita, that it's better to do a mitzvah at the right time, and that's why the imperative would be to make kiddush Friday night, even when I have the opportunity to make it up Shabbos day. Umi amrinan chaviva mitzvah b'shaita. Since when would we say that over here? V'hatanya hanichnas lebeiso b'motzoi Shabbos. We saw this brisa before, that if a person comes home Motzoi Shabbos. Now we're gonna parse these words very carefully in just a moment. So let's read these words very carefully. You come to your house for Motzoi Shabbos. So where were you the whole time? You were in shul. Presumably you were in shul davening Ma'ariv. So you come back home after davening in shul Ma'ariv. You come back to your house for Motzoi Shabbos. Mevarech al hayayin v'al hamor v'al habesamim v'achar kach omer havdalah ala kos. So first, you're going to, when you make Havdalah, you make the bracha first on the yayin, then on the ner, and then on the besamim, and then you make Havdalah al hakos, and you make Havdalah. V'im eino elakos echad, and if you only have one cup of wine, manicho ad la'achar hamazunu mishalshul kulon la'acharov. So, but if you only have one cup of wine, what do we let you do? You can have a malava malka before you make Havdalah, so that way, when you bench, you'll bench first and then do the whole Havdalah process, and you'll kill two birds with one stone. You'll be able to be benching alakos, and you'll be able to make Havdalah alakos. Remember, we talked about this yesterday. The Shulchan Aruch only paskins this way when you always bench alakos, but we don't do this. And as we explained yesterday, you can take a look at the Shir on Kosher too. V'lo amrinan chaviva mitzvah b'shaita. So the Gemara says, based on this brisa, you see that you don't say chaviva mitzvah b'shaita, because if the imperative was chaviva mitzvah b'shaita, the first opportunity you should do the mitzvah, do it, we should have said, make Havdalah al hakos first, and then have your malava malka, because the first thing you got to do is make Havdalah. So Amar lei, so he said back to him, look, ana lo chachima'a ana, v'lo chaza'a ana, v'lo yichida'a ana, ela gamarna v'sadarna ana. There's a couple of different girsos in this Gemara, but basically he says, look, I'm not a wise man, I'm not a seer, I'm not an individual who's making this up on his own or citing an individual opinion, but rather gamarna v'sadarna. But I have very carefully studied this from my teachers, and I have been able to organize and collate all the information that I have received from my teachers that have come before me and come to the correct conclusion. And basically what he's saying to him is that, look, it's not because I'm wise on my own, but everything that I've gotten, I've received through a tradition from my Rebbeim, and they explained it to me very clearly. You're trying to compare apples and oranges. You're saying that the Chaviva Mitzvah B'Shaita, you see, does not apply by Havdalah, and therefore you want to apply that to the rules of Kiddush as well, but that's not true. He says, and furthermore, he says, V'chein morin b'vei medrash kavasi. And furthermore, and because I am so meticulous in organizing and collating the teachings of my teachers, they paskin like me in the base medrash because they know that they can rely on my teachings. And shiny lon beni yula yoma lafuke yoma. And the reason why it's different is because there's a fundamental difference between ushering in Shabbos and escorting Shabbos out. Iyula yoma kol kama demekadminon lei adifu mechavavinon lei. That when it comes to ushering in Shabbos with the recital of Kiddush, the more that you can make it early, the more that you can make the ushering in of Shabbos early, the better off you are, because you show your affinity for Shabbos by saying, I can't wait to bring in Shabbos. And that's why we tell you, do not delay making Kiddush until the next day, but make Kiddush at the first available moment. Whereas by contrast, when it comes to Havdalah, the reason why we can sanction delaying Havdalah until after you've had your Malava Malka is because of the additional issue that you want to hold on to Shabbos as long as possible. There's no imperative to make Havdalah as soon as possible, because just the opposite. By making Havdalah as quickly as you can, you're showing that Havdalah or Shabbos was a burden upon you. And that's why my practice has been to say a very lengthy Havdalah with a lot of singing, because when you do that, when you sing a lot and you do a 3 or 4 minute Havdalah instead of a 30-second Havdalah, you show that you really are reluctant to let go of Shabbos, and you should hang on to Shabbos longer, and you should try to let Shabbos linger as long as you can. Even though you've got a lot of stuff to do Motzei Shabbos, you got all your emails waiting for you, and you got all your phone messages waiting for you, and you got all your kids you want to speak to, and all of these other things you got to take care of. But there's still this imperative to hold on to Shabbos as long as you can, and not to make it appear to you like it's a burden.
But this argument they're saying about eating, I'm sorry to confuse, but you can't eat until you made Havdalah. So what are they saying? I missed something.
Well, this is the exception to that rule. You can't eat until Havdalah. We talked about this yesterday. When you only have 1 cup of wine, the rabbis say that it's so important for you to say Birkas Hamazon al Hakos with a cup of wine, that since you only have 1 cup, you're going to have to choose between Havdalah and Malava Malka. You're either going to be able to have that cup of wine for Havdalah, or you'll be able to have that cup of wine for Birkas Hamazon, but you can't do both unless we give you a special pass that you can have Malava Malka before you make Havdalah, and that way, right after benching, you'll bench and then make Havdalah on the same cup of wine.
Wouldn't be going on Shel Shudas, the case, like not Malava Malka, the Gemara is talking about.
No, the Gemara here is not talking.
So if you have only 1 case,
the Gemara here is not talking about.
Shudas, you'd have the same type.
Right, and that was what the Sugya Shir that I gave on Monday night was about. But that's not the case of the Gemara over here. That's not the case. The Gemara here is talking about letting you make a Malava Malka, start a meal after Shabbos is already over.
So if you've said Hamavdil in Shemona Esrei, you, besides the eating thing, can you do any malacha until you've said Havdalah?
You get in your car.
Yeah, we do permit you to do malacha, but only that which you need, malacha that you need to do in order to make Havdalah. In other words, you should not engage in protracted malacha that is not absolutely necessary until you make Havdalah.
So let's say for family at home, so until you get home to make Havdalah, they should keep Shabbos until you've made Havdalah, or once you've said Mavdil in Shul?
Well, they have to say Baruch HaMavdil also. They have to say Baruch HaMavdil as well. Okay. Shma mina miha masnisa tmani. The Gemara says we can adduce from this brisa 8 halachos. Now, some of these eight are going to be obvious to us because we've been learning this for several days already. but the Gemara is going to speak out the 8 things that we adduce from this brisa. Shema mina, hamavdil batafila tzarech sheyavdil alakos. Number 1, we learned that if, even though you said Havdalah in shul, you said Atachan Antanu in your Shmona Esrei, you still have to come back home and make Havdalah over a cup of wine. It's not sufficient just to say Hamavdil in or Atachan Antanu in Shmona Esrei. Ushma mina bracha to unakos. Furthermore, we learned that the making of Havdalah has to be done al hakos. Now, this is a little bit different. This is talking about Birkas Hamazon. This is not talking about Havdalah. This teaches me that when you bench, you have to bench with the kos. Because if you didn't need to bench al hakos, then we wouldn't give you the heter of eating malav malka before Havdalah. Ushma mina koshel brachat tzarech shir. Another thing that you learn is that we said you only have 1 cup of wine, which presumably means you only have a revius of wine. So that means that you need to have a requisite shear in order to be able to make a bracha on the wine. We don't allow you to split up the wine into 2 half revios and do half a revius on Birkas Hamazon and a half a revius on Havdalah. We don't permit that. Ushma mina, the next thing that we learn is hamavarech tzarech sheyitom. We also learn that the person who's making the bracha has to taste some of the wine, because if you only have exactly a revius, the reason why we don't allow you to make Havdalah first, then taste the wine, and then use the remainder. We would argue, make Havdalah lakos, don't drink anything, and then have malava malka, and then bench afterwards, and then you can drink the wine. And that way you'll be able to preserve your whole revius for Birkas Hamazon. So the Gemara says, you see that we don't allow that. You have to taste the wine after Havdalah, or give it to a tinok like we paskin. But someone has to taste that wine.
You don't have to drink a revius.
You don't have to drink a revius, but you have to drink something. Ushma mina ta'amo. Now, as far as there is a requirement for a rov revius to be drunk. That's a separate halacha. The only thing is that we don't require that it be, and it has to be malo lugmav, it has to be rov revius. But we don't require the mavdil necessarily to make it. Ushma mina ta'amo pagmo. Another thing that we learn is that by tasting the wine, you've made it pogum and no longer usable, because once you put your lips to the cup, even if you have more than a revius, but once you put your lips to the cup, you can't now use that cup for another bracha. Tosfos asks a very interesting question. Tosfos says, why not spill a little bit off into your hand, even if you only have 1 kos? But so spill a little bit over into your hand, lick it up, right? And after Havdalah, and then you have a full cup of a revius that you can use for Birkas Hamazon afterwards. Why don't we allow that? So for Tosfos v'yesh lomar b'kos chova kegon Havdalah Birkas Hamazon v'kiddush sarach lishtos mikos sheyesh bo revius. That won't work, because for Havdalah and for Birkas Hamazon and for Kiddush, you can't pour it off into your hand and lick it up. You have to drink from a kos that is machzik a revius, that holds a revius. Let's say you only have 1 cup. That's what we're talking about. So hilkach lo efshir lemitam biyadei o b'chli acher, right? And therefore that would not be a viable option for you. So I guess if you only have a revius of wine, but you have multiple cups, or let's say you have a slightly more than a revius and you have multiple cups, then perhaps spilling off a little bit would work. But the Gemara doesn't get into that. So, and then ushma mina ta'am mavdil. We also learn from here that even though a person has eaten Motzoi Shabbos Malav Malka before Havdalah, we still permit him to make Havdalah Motzoi Shabbos. Now this is in contrast to a mandomer that we'll see in tomorrow's DAF, who says that once you've eaten something after Shabbos, we penalize you and we don't allow you to make Havdalah until the following day. Okay, and then Ushma Mina Omer Beis Kedushos Al Kos Echad. We also learn that you can say 2 brachos on 1 kos, on 1 cup of wine, when there's no other option. Like we said, when you only have 1 cup, we still allow you to do mitzvahs chavilos if there's no other option. Ushma mina be'shama hi v'aliba de Rabbi Yehuda. And the last thing, the 8th thing that we learn, is that if you recall, we had a machlokus between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda as to what the machlokus Beis Shammai Beis Hillel is in the Mishnah in Maseches Brachos, the 8th parak, when we talked about a person who only has one kos and he needs to make Havdalah and Birkas Hamazon at the same time after his Malava Malka. So according to Rabbi Meir, there was a machlokus as far as the order, but Rabbi Yehuda had said that the machlokus is only, everyone agrees that you first benching is first and Havdalah is at the end, and the only machlokus is that sandwiched in between those brachas of Birkas Hamazon and Havdalah, do you first make the bracha on the Ner and then the Besamim, or do you first make the bracha on the Besamim and then on the Ner? And it was Beis Shammai, according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says you first make the bracha on the Eish and then you make a bracha on the Besamim. Not like we do. So we see that this brisa goes according to Beis Shammai and not according to Beis Hillel, according to Rabbi Yehuda's interpretation. And this is where we'll hold it for today. You all have a wonderful day.